very nice to see you all. I have not come, unlike Rupert Murdoch, with any carefully rehearsed sound bites for you to record. And this may not be the most humble day of my life, I don't know. Seeing, it's rather terrifying to have read so many tweets saying, really looking forward to hearing Jancis Robinson's keynote this afternoon. Can I possibly live up to it? I suspect not. But I will do my best. And I will slightly gallop through what I have to say, because I'd much rather talk about what you want me to talk about. I have time for a bit of a Q&A at the end, than bore you stiff with what I think you want me to talk about. My strategy was to ask Joel and Alan what you had said you wanted me to talk about, and just to respond to that. So that's what I'm going to do. Somebody said she's gambled the whole farm in online, which I don't think is quite true. I feel as though I spend my time working like crazy at all sorts of things, but definitely, most of all, on JancisRobinson.com, which my children call my fourth child, slightly grudgingly. How I got into it is how I got into everything in my long life, writing about wine. Not through having a strategy, I'm afraid, but through responding to external stimuli. I started up Britain's probably one and only newsletter about wine when somebody came over from New York and said, "We've got these wine newsletters, you ought to have one." So I went, okay, I'll do it. And I did the JancisRobinson.com because in 2000, when everything was .com mad, lots of people came to see me at home saying, "I can make your fortune, come into business with me and we'll do fantastic things online." The guy that I thought was the best and most suitable turned out to be not quite telling the truth, but it was a bit late because I'd already got the inside back jacket of my next book was touting JancisRobinson.com. So although I no longer was going to do what he wanted me to do, JancisRobinson.com had to exist. So in December 2000, in a just humiliatingly primitive format, JancisRobinson.com started. But it became absolutely riveting, as probably everybody in this room knows, what fun it is to be writing online about your favourite subject. So I found myself spending more and more time on it, and finally, after a year, I just didn't want to take ads. Maybe it's because Britain is a smaller country than here, and I felt uncomfortable going to people that I knew asking for ad money or sponsorship, I don't know, but I decided that I would try and have a subscription part of the website, which, because the initial website was kind of all yellows and oranges and greens, but I had another colourway which was more purpley and bluey. We called it Purple Pages. So the subscription bit's always been Purple Pages. And by mistake, we launched it about a week early. And in the first half hour, we had subscribers. We had one subscription from Brazil, and I think 2 from the UK. And so we thought, hey, now let's gross that up. That didn't quite manage. We don't get 3 new subscriptions every half hour, but it did show us that at that time I was working just with a sort of more techie guy. It did show us that there was a need or a market out there. One of my fellow wine writers in Britain, who used to write under the name Super Plonk, whose mantra was, "Any wine that costs more than $10 a bottle must be rubbish," he said, "I bet Jancis dinner at the Fat Duck," very good restaurant, if she could possibly ever prove to me that she's going to make any money with this subscription website. And I was able to go straight back and say, already this is what I spent, this is what's happening, how about my dinner at the Fat Duck? And he, like a whip, came back and said, actually, how about coming round to my place? And drinking up some samples. No, so I didn't do that. But anyway, and I was delighted when it won. There's a competition sponsored by Louis Roederer, who finally got grant for Louis Roeder International Wine Writers Awards, which you should all apply for because they're desperate to have more international applicants. And they finally had a category for websites, and we won, JancisRobinson.com won the first website of the year, so that was very nice. But, and as I say, of all the things that I do, it is the one thing that I love most of all. I find it compulsive. I spend far more hours on it every day than I do for anything else. But of course it's by no means perfect. And I think probably, and I'm delighted to be here, forced to confront all these issues as a producer of online material. I think part of the reason we're here is to together look at the sorts of ways we can make what we do better. And I'm particularly keen that you have forced me to do that. I had a great big twinge of guilt when I read Tom Walk's description of his dinner last night with quite a few of you, which I recommend to all of you. And he had a few little bullet points about what to do. One of which was spend at least as much time marketing what you do as you do writing it. And I know I should follow that advice, Tom, I really do. My problem is that I'm fascinated by the production line side of it rather than the sales and marketing. But my younger daughter has just done a 3-month internship in a PR department in New York, and I went to pick her up at Heathrow, and within 3 minutes of getting in the car, she said, "Mum, I think you need a publicist." And in a way she's right, and she's bossy as well. So I've gone ahead and for the first time ever, it's a very un-British thing to publicise yourself, but I have actually hired somebody to try and publicise the website in the UK. But really I think I need somebody here, because I think wine is hot, new, millennial and interesting, and I think that there are far more potential readers of material about wine online here than anywhere else in the world. And let's hope we can all benefit from it. But it is great fun. I think one of the reasons that many people have ever, who first of all came on the website, had ever heard of me, was books. And probably I've been writing about wine since 75, can you believe it? And probably made more of my reputation at the beginning writing books. A lot of you here will think that books are dead. I'm not sure they're dead. In fact, I'm certain they're not dead, but I think that the means by which they get to their readers obviously is in full flux. I heard a story this morning from somebody writing a book about Virginia wine, which sent a chill down my spine, about what publishers expect. I remember very, very early on, there was a grande dame of English wine writing called Pamela Van Dyke Price. She was very frightening, and she once summoned me to her flat in London. You had to sort of walk through a thicket of sample bottles, which I suppose people think that that's what my place is like now. And she sat me down with a glass of wine and nodded at the book she was working on. She said, "You will learn, my dear, that there is a special hole in hell for publishers." And it's certainly true that the relationship between authors and publishers is not naturally friendly. I personally think that there will continue to be an appetite for book-like things about wine, because there is just so much information. But obviously the future surely is self-publishing, and presumably you too have read about what J.K. Rowling of Harry Potter fame is now doing. She's not even selling her books through Amazon, she's selling them all through her own website. Wouldn't it be nice to get into that position? And I don't see why we can't move towards that. All I'd say is that I think some of the self-published books that I've seen so far don't share quite as high production values as my idea of the perfect wine book. But I'm sure that will come, and perhaps if we take more control, that will become very, very easy. I've watched, my first book came out in '79, and I've been churning out books ever since. And I was very frustrated for the first sort of 8 years, I'd say, of my website's existence, when publishers sort of mostly seemed to sort of think it had a sort of bad smell, and they didn't really want to mention it, most of them, and still saw the printed word as king. And then finally there was a kind of huge volte-face sort of 2 or 3 years ago, when suddenly my publishers would be saying to me, how do you do this thing again, you know, this online thing? Or they'd start up a web page with the name of the publisher and actually list their books on it and think, that's marvellous, you know, we'll never have to change that again. Luckily though, Oxford University Press, who published one of my best known books, The Oxford Companion to Wine, have always been very, very good at getting it about online publishing. To the extent that one of their people was a judge in the Born Digital Awards about wine writers, which actually I judged this year, which was interesting. I am continuing to write books, and in fact, at the moment, if you see this, the first article there, a new summer regime at jr.com, has very, very sad news as far as I'm concerned. With 2 other people, my assistant Julia Harding MW, and a very good Swiss botanist called José Vuillamos, we're producing a massive, brand new great guide to all the wine grapes in the world, about 1,400 of them that are used commercially, including all the latest DNA stuff about how they're all related, you know, that Pinot Noir is Cabernet's auntie, sort of thing. And I have finally realised that I'm not going to make enough progress on it while being in charge of the website. So my fingers have been sort of prized off the website, and I've handed over management of it to the 3 key fellow team members. And it's so scary. It's very nasty. And of course, I'll be furious if they screw it up, and I'll be furious if they make a really good go of it. So, so at the moment I'm finishing off the great book. So I've got 6 weeks where I promise not to be managing the site, although I'm continuing to contribute to it. I can't stop myself. Got another book coming out with Linda Murphy on American wine, the 7th edition of the World Atlas of Wine, and then OUP are threatening to make me do the next edition of the Oxford Companion to Wine. So it's all, I can't tell, I just enjoy writing for a website so much more than those long, long deadlines of books. But I don't think books are dead, and there is huge demand for wine books in China. I will just throw that into the pot if any of you want to get between hard covers and make a pitch for a growing market. Journalism is another thing that I'm still doing, and some of you may think is old hat, but actually looking at the means by which people come to jancisrobinson.com, the Financial Times, where I have a column every Saturday, is a major driver of traffic to my website. And I'm very, very lucky that, again, the FT, Financial Times, got online a long time ago too, and they're one of the few papers that are making money selling subscriptions, online subscriptions. And allowed me always to publish my FT articles on my site, and they mention my site at the end of every article, and I'm very grateful for that. And of course it's very complimentary, because I can write an overview of something in a newspaper in the measly little 1,000 words that I'm given, and then have all that huge backup of the tasting notes that on the site for people who are committed enough to want to be members of Purple Pages. And I'm also very lucky that the Financial Times and my website have more or less overlapping global readerships, with probably more or less equal Britain and UK and US, and then spread around the rest of the world to make up about another third of readers. My husband Nick, who writes about restaurants for the Financial Times, asked the deputy editor of the Financial Times the other day what his biggest problem was, and apparently it was not dealing with the unions or the workforce, but dealing with Apple, he said. And of this, of course, is to remind us about distribution. I would say that holding on to distribution is a major challenge for us all. And of course, if you're just going to hand over a third of everything to Apple, that makes a huge difference to your bottom line. Apps is obviously, makes me think of apps. I still haven't, I've explored various different projects for apps based on my stuff with several different people, outfits of very different sorts, and we still haven't managed to come up with the winning formula. I hope to do that, and I was very flattered when the first iPad wine magazine was produced in Holland by a team who chose to make me the subject of it. So that was very nice to have a kind of presence there without actually having to produce the thing. What I'll also say though about online, again, I would urge you not to just, I know there's a certain sort of anti-printed word feeling among bloggers, but it's not evil, and it can bring people to your blogs. And of course now you have the means in your hands to syndicate your materials so easily. And there are still magazines, even if many of them are now having to turn to events for a revenue stream, because ads revenues are plummeting and subscriptions tend to be falling as well. And it is so easy to syndicate your stuff now. You just need a whole load of email addresses of friendly editors, and then with one email you've syndicated your content. You don't need to sign up for syndication agencies and things like that. Television was another thing that I've been very lucky to be involved in from early on. This is the great advantage of being so old. You're the, done things for so long. I was the presenter of, I keep saying it's the world's first television series about wine, and no one's ever challenged me. It was transmitted in UK's new channel, Channel 4, in 1983, then another series in 85, then another series in 87, and then that Hugh Johnson, who was a good friend of mine, came muscling in and he got the commission for the one after that, which was his History of Wine series. But God, we used to go around the world with a crew of something like 12 or 13 people, and it was so cumbersome. And admittedly, with our last series, big series that we did for the BBC on film, we didn't make life easy for ourselves, so we had massive equipment. So it would take, you had to budget in something like 3 hours just to get out of an airport. And of course, if I contrast that with nowadays going around with my little clip video around the world of wine, just doing little interviews with people, or sitting in my back garden and even filming myself, we all have such means so easily available to us to do things that in the old days used to take huge teams. And I mean, that BBC series that we did called Jancis Wine Course, that won lots of awards, and it was very nice, and it had a long life. That was in the mid-90s, but the budget for it was nearly £1 million. I mean, of course, nowadays you can do everything so much cheaper. Not perhaps to the same high polished standard, but maybe people don't need that anymore. And anyone who's ever watched any of the videos on my website will see that I don't necessarily believe in high production values. I think there is a value to be had for that gritty, not quite perfectly lit interview with, whoever. Another little string to my bow, which has on which all this immediacy and online communication has some impact on, is wine judging. I'm sure lots of you do wine judging. And that's slightly changed nowadays, hasn't it? It used to be that you'd have a big wine competition, everyone went away and collated the results, and then they were kind of drip-fed or told to people at a great ceremony, 4 months later. Nowadays, everyone's tweeting from the tasting bench saying, hey, this wine is great, it's already won, and all that sort of thing. So the whole structure of wine competitions, I think, is having to respond to the online challenge. And we come then to Twitter, which I really surprised myself by how much I'm enjoying Twitter. And when I looked earlier today, my number of followers is 99,306. It's awfully close to. No, well, it's a bit ironic that I'm slightly taking my hands off the website. at this stage. I started it because I thought it would drive people to the website, but actually when I ask people who become Purple Pages, how did you find this? Twitter's quite low, and it's quite low in the Google Analytics too. It's only 3% of people come from Twitter to the website. So I'm just doing it because I enjoy it, and but again, as those of you who tweet know, it again is addictive, and I do think, and there's a very, very wide variation in the interest value of tweets, wouldn't you say? And I do believe they do have to be authentic, and those that look as though they're sort of written by a marketing person stand out a mile, and they have to be interesting too, please. Now, general stuff. I was asked to talk in general about blogging and possible future of, and one or two specific subjects. I was lucky enough, well, lucky is actually not the right word, I was lumbered with judging these 2 Writers' Awards this year, one being the Born Digital Wine Awards, and the other the Louis Roederer one. And so I did get to read a lot of blogs in the last 2 or 3 months, and came up with a few overriding impressions. One is that there isn't that much investigative stuff, it seems to me, and I don't think you have to be a phone hacker to do some good investigative writing. And we're all flexible. You don't have to go to someone and get permission to do something. There were 1 or 2 really good investigative online pieces in what I read, but I think there's probably too much just sitting on your backside and taking things as they are, rather than sort of going out and really looking for wrongdoing or sharp practice or something like that. And we are in the ideal position to do that. And originality was quite thin on the ground. A lot of online coverage of wine is very formulaic, I think you'd agree. But perhaps the good news from the point of view of everyone here is that when I compared with what most wineries were writing online, that was even worse. And admittedly, it must be difficult to do a sales pitch and make it interesting, but I think some people do. So I would just stress that it's the writing, it's the thinking and then the writing, and anything you can do to hone your writing skills must be helpful. I'm not saying that my writing's brilliant at all, but I think we should all just try that much harder. Occasionally I've had to give a talk to the Masters of Wine students about how to write an essay, and I always say, if you're looking for stylistic pointers, it's very difficult to go wrong with looking at The Economist magazine. It tackles some really tough, difficult subjects, but it does it in a hugely accessible way. No jargon, quite colloquial actually, surprisingly. It's not at all like an academic paper. And of course you could just buy 1 copy and keep it forever. But keep referring to it for its sort of style, I think. Or if you have your own style which people love, that's great too. But that's not always the case with everybody. And a little practical whinge, looking at stuff online, it's quite shocking how little of it is dated, in my view. And it's really frustrating to look something up and you get reams of stuff and someone's saying this has just happened or something, but there's no date on it, so you can't place it. So please date what you write. Now, I'm asked to talk about how to foster online communities specifically, and I believe that a courteous tone goes down a treat. I think it's very helpful to foster something that's inclusive rather than exclusive, because you want as many people in your online community as possible, so you want to encourage them. I think you want to, a lot of people with wine feel intimidated, and in a lot of sort of forums and boards, you can see most of them are dominated by people showing off their knowledge, and then very occasionally you'll get somebody saying, this is my first post, hope this question isn't too simple, but blah, blah, blah. And those are the people we want. We want to encourage all of those in, and we want more and more of those people. So I think it's a good idea to be explicitly encouraging to the newcomers and those who don't obviously have an enormous amount of knowledge. I also believe that whenever I get direct emails from visitors or members, that it sounds trite this, but that we always respond to them very politely, however impolitely someone comes at you. They've been trying to press a button and the button doesn't work, or they've forgotten their password or something like that. And sometimes, you know who's written the email after 3 glasses of Zinfandel. But it is a good, we always try to go back in a very calming, polite, friendly way. And it's a wonderful, it just works a treat. And then you get another email back from the same person who was swearing at you in the first thing. Oh, thank you. All that, of course, is if you want to be liked. Of course, there are certain sites and certain people whose stock in trade is to be a whipping boy or girl and want to be disliked. But I think, by and large, if you want to get more and more people reading you, tell them that you like them. Or to go Gary V about it, tell them you love them. You know. And we miss him. It's a shame. Now, writing for, it goes without saying that you need to be accurate. In fact, most of my adjectives about what the ideal prose is begin with vowels. Accurate, opinionated, entertaining, original, all of those. Writing for a global readership, which I do all the time, we're very lucky we've got an international subject, which people all over the world love. We also have international search engines. I know there are several of them. I'm a particular fan of Wine Searcher, which has just geared itself up recently so that it has a new panel which gives you the background to every wine as well as telling you where to get it. It really is a village now, the community of wine lovers. I'm amazed. I suddenly have some new best friends who are Chinese wine lovers, and I certainly wouldn't have made contact with them if it weren't for the internet. Obviously, to write for a global readership, you do have to minimise local references, local jokes, unfortunately. Just try and make global jokes, that's what I'm saying. Time difference challenges, of course. I know to my cost that I could be working every single minute of the day because there are comments coming in all the time because people are all around the world. We have people in 162 countries. Our visitors are from 162 countries and our members are from just over 100 countries. So there's never a moment when you couldn't be answering somebody's query. What has surprised me was another thing I was asked to talk about. I think it's the huge commitment of time that I have made willingly has surprised me. I couldn't possibly have combined having a website with when our children were young. And I admire anyone who manages to have young children and a website. I suppose they just have to have a very, very supportive partner or a fleet of nannies or something like that. And I'm certainly surprised by how addictive the whole thing is. I'm surprised by how perfect it is for control freaks like me. It's just wonderful not to need to wait for or pander to or agree with editors, directors, producers, publishers. It's just marvellous for us, and we are in control. We control the means of production. It's a sort of Marxist phenomenon, really, or certainly very, very democratic. Everyone has a voice. It's just a question of who's going to actually listen to the voice, and we all want to maximise the number of people who do listen to our voices. What also surprised me was the speed with which you get a direct response. And of course, as someone who had a reputation as a wine writer long before the online revolution, the real surprise, of course, is that suddenly we get criticised. You know, we weren't used to that. We used to sort of hand over our copy and our books, and you know, people were were lucky, were kind enough to buy them, and very occasionally we might get a letter after someone had read one of our books saying, I don't agree, or more likely, the dot for Chateau Figeac is slightly too far to the right, or something like that. And now, of course, you get people immediately saying, rubbish, or, hasn't she even thought of this, or something like that. And I think it is very, very good for us, I must say. And I think that, of course, is another reason for nurturing a courteous kind of online community, that any comments are made not too aggressively. And I mean, for instance, there's the scary thing that half of you are sitting here with a camera or something recording all these words, whereas I used to be, I liked speaking to friendly audiences, and really I used to always like doing it off the record, because you could say rather, things that might insult the odd person, but always got a laugh. And nowadays I can't. I've got to mind my P's and Q's, because I know that it's all on the record, which is not so good. And for all I know, people are tweeting, "Oh, she's rambling on, can't believe it." It used to be after giving a talk, when I'd go to the bathroom to the ladies, and as soon as I shut the door, I'd go, "Oh, please don't anyone come in and start talking about me, or quickly make it, get out of there as fast as possible, because it would be so embarrassing." But now you can tweet in private. But of course, if you say @Jancis Robinson, I will see. I'll go back. Future, briefly. Obviously, it's the hardware, I think, that's changing most rapidly at the moment, with everything going onto phones. I wish, Joel, wherever you are, I was as good at getting my website onto a phone as you seem to think I am. It's not perfect, and I'm working on that. The main thing, though, is this is called, what's it called, the Wine Bloggers Conference, and I'm sure the first few editions you felt as though the most important thing about this event was the word bloggers. But of course, the most important thing is wine. And and there used to be this kind of bloggers v print media kind of holy war. Sometimes people would be quite rude to me because I still dabbled in the printed word. It was a bit like screw caps versus corks and all that sort of thing. Very boring, but people got very, very passionate about it. But now, virtually all wine communicators are online, even if some of them also write on the printed page as well. And I suspect that, you might end up renaming this, or that bloggers will just become, kind of people, as opposed to sort of carrying this great knapsack called a blog on their back. Everyone really is now communicating online. Incidentally, who here depends solely on, put up your hand if you depend solely on a blog for your living? Thank you. Yeah, you don't have to keep that very long. Well, very, 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 very best of luck, is what I say. Because it is not easy, I know. I think that for many people here, you'll be hoping that your blogs are leading to other things, whether it's consultancies or special assignments. And I would, since I assume that if you have another way of earning a living, you know a lot about something else, I think it would be great if you brought the knowledge that you have of that something else to the world of wine, and applied it, and used that sort of expertise. If you're a brilliant statistician, then tell us something about wine statistics, for instance, or lawyers, or something like that. But I do think the barriers are going to blur more and more between everyone who writes in whatever medium. But as I think we're all agreed, wine is the thing, and we all share the challenge of describing it, which I think is going to be Eric's speciality and what he's going to be talking about tomorrow, which I'm very much looking forward to listening to. But what we've got to realise is how lucky we are. I mean, we're writing about this delicious, very varied, global thing, made by people who, on the whole, are quite staggeringly interesting compared with the people that you meet in other walks of life. They're hospitable people, they've got stories, they tend to be original. What I particularly like, I wanted to say, about this group, when I looked at the list of participants and compare it with the gender ratios of members of my site, where even you'd think if you're a woman interested in wine, my site might be one of the ones that you'd be more likely to go to. But in fact, among even my members, only 15% are women. It is a very male thing to spend money on information about wine, I think. So I was thrilled to see quite how many women there are here today. And it struck me there was a positive army of Amy's. I don't know why. I don't know why in particular Amy's are attracted to wine, but there seem to be lots of them. So I would just urge you to remember wine is king. Spread the word of wine. The most important lesson I ever learned about wine was from my predecessor at the Financial Times, a wonderfully crusty guy called Edmund Henning Rousel, who never hesitated to admit if he didn't know something. And there was no hot air. And in fact, the thing he most often said to me, really, very interesting, tell me more. Oh. And I was a fraction of his age, you know, but he always kept learning. So I think humility is a very, very important quality in anyone writing about a subject as magical as wine. We never, ever know it all, and we should never, ever write as though we know it all. My final hope is that this multiplicity of voices that we now have about wine means that we no longer have, that we will no longer have just one or two voices telling people what to buy. That retailers will regain their rightful role of making their own selections rather than regurgitating those of a handful of voices. And who knows, maybe my original dream of sharing information with consumers so that they can make up their own minds as increasingly well-informed wine drinkers, confident of their own judgments and preferences, will actually come true. I hope so. Thank you. My oldest, who's a very, very strong-minded girl who is rather like me, I must say, control freakery isn't in it. She used to say to me when I was hunched over a deadline in a manuscript, she said, I don't know why you're bothering to write those books. She said, no one's going to buy them. Anyway, let's, what would you like to talk about? Any questions or comments? We've got, well, we had 9 minutes before I started telling you about my daughter, so we've probably got 8 now. Or not. You can all just go and... There. Hi, 17.
Table 17. I have a question. First of all, thank you for coming. That's
Pleasure.
It's really great to hear you speak. You were mentioning like long form before and
long form.
Long form writing.
Oh right. Does that mean not online?
Or investigative.
Oh, investigative.
Yeah.
Right.
And I was wondering if you could maybe suggest a story or two that both bloggers and the in-print people have missed as far as wine's concerned. It's going to be an important story.
Right.
To write about.
Let's think. I mean, if I have that brilliant idea, I want to do it myself. That's quite a, suddenly think of that. I mean, there are a lot of pretty sharp practices in retailing out there, and sort of probably misquotes, I would think. That's probably an old story, but, people using the wrong vintage and all that sort of thing. There's the whole kind of, one aspect I was going to talk about was I did mention distribution a couple of times, and I think we're very lucky that what we have to distribute is not a tangible thing. So, and we have the means to distribute it through the internet ourselves. But of course, you can't take that shortcut for wine. And one of the things that hugely distinguishes the very vibrant and wonderful American wine market from any other, the massive restrictions you have. Obviously the whole shipping thing, which is being made quite an issue of in some quarters, which is quite right. But I suppose that whole conglomeration of distributors, and you know the way the poor old, the little ones are getting trampled on, and there's surely some digging around for stories there. I'm trying to think of US specific ones, but what about among wine producers? Well, we just had, I mean, one has to say that the good old American Journal of Wine Statistics, or whatever it's called, that keeps churning out a fair number of stories, doesn't it? You know, recently the one about the difference between the alcohol levels on the labels and actual alcohol levels of wine. That caused quite a stir in the UK, actually. They're rather clever at getting headlines too, which a lot of us aren't. Well, and obviously additives. Well, a means of an alcohol reduction, and I suppose a lot of people would be quite horrified by the notion of water being added to wine. There's a whole issue there, even if it makes it more palatable. I was very interested in the story. Now, where was that? Where did it come out? Where it was shown that the increased levels of alcohol in wine, particularly in this country, were not, as has glibly been said, because of climate change, but because of deliberate policy on the part of producers. And there's that whole nexus of conflict, isn't there, between growers and winemakers, and the growers wanting to pick early, and the producers wanting them slightly shriveled and, you know, less weight, I think. That's enough original thought. Yes.
How many staff people do you have working with you on the website, sort of equating to like full-time people? And what has been the biggest challenge to you in creating and maintaining it?
So staff, the only single actual nominal full-time person is Julia, who's she was a copy editor and is fearsome. I mean, if you get a colon when it should be a semicolon, and the Bulgarian accents, and she's fantastic. And she was a top master of wine when she passed first time and everything. She's a very good taster, so I'm very, very lucky to have her. Then there's a miracle person called Tamlin Curran, who's the one who's photographed down there, who really is full-time, actually. She's the sort of queen of the tasting note database, but she also writes very nicely and tastes well. She's done her diploma and done the WSET diploma and stuff. She's wine nut. And Richard Hemming has just done his Master of Wine exams. And he's maybe about half time. That's editorial. And then we have special people who specialise in various areas. Walter Speller, Italy; Michael Schmidt, Germany; Linda Murphy, California; Louis, whose surname I'm afraid I don't even know how to pronounce, on Spain, who's new and very good. And then there's a part-time sort of admin subscriptions person. And then if I need sort of software development, there's a company that I take my problems to. But we just feed it in ourselves, so it's only if things go wrong. And then there's a sort of very, very part-time, very nice American woman who now lives in Switzerland, who's been a sort of a very mild marketing advisor for almost the whole life of the thing. I mean, she's got children and only spares a few hours each week. But she gets the ethos of the site, and if someone comes to me saying, you ought to be doing this, but we know it's just a bit too brash or something, she's very good sounding board. I think that's it.
And then the biggest challenge?
Biggest challenge is probably stopping myself writing and actually doing some bigger thinking about it and bigger doing about it. I mean, I've needed to redesign the sign-up pages of that for possibly a year, and it's just, you know, stepping back and getting it done. Those are the sort of things that one naturally does what you like the most. But probably, you know, I sort of wouldn't it be nice to have twice as many Americans knowing about it? But, you know, if I redesign the sign-up pages, that might happen. But it's boring.
One more question, Jancis?
One more question then.
Particularly with respect to books and self-published books, but also with respect to other media that you've mentioned, what do you see as the value of editing? And do you think we're losing anything by increasingly reducing editing?
Oh, I think it's shocking how little books are edited nowadays compared to how they used to be. And as we all know, spell check does not edit. I think consumers notice whether things are well edited or not. Silly little typos diminish your product, really. So I feel very grateful that I've got the human shield of Julia, the mesh. I won't say there are no typos on the website, but at least I do know she will go through things with a fine-tooth comb. And our great book, I think, is going to get a very good editing, because it's going to be a sort of very much the top non-fiction edition, you know, print of Penguin's top non-fiction department for us. So I think that's okay. But no, it's a very good point, and I think we all have to self-edit quite a bit.
Thank you very much.